Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Debbie, who's an intermediate photographer. Debbie says she shot this at Mono Lake in California. She said she was really drawn into the idea of this being such a calm and beautiful place, but then having this real strong feeling of the rough terrain and rough texture of the tough formations that you'll see if you go to Mono Lake. Debbie shot this with a Nikon D300, 18 to 200 millimeter zoom, 44 millimeter focal length. So I'm assuming that after the crop factor, this is sort of a very short telephoto focal length. And Debbie shot this at ISO 200, stopped down to f11, and 1/13 of a second was the shutter speed. Under questions and comments, Debbie says that her first instinct was to stop down even more, go to a slower shutter speed, and soften the water, but she felt like the rough formations needed the balance of the texture in the water. And so let's get right into it. I want to get to Debbie's question in just a second. One of the things I love about this image is color. Right away I'm really enjoying colors that are more tertiary instead of, like a classic blue or an orange at sunset. These are more painterly colors. This blue-green down in here and some of these pastels in the sky, instead of the classic primaries, these painterly colors can almost right out of the gate with color give the image a feeling that's more extraordinary. So I'm really enjoying the play of more painterly colors here. I think it goes really well too with more of the surreal sort of lakescape here in the tough formations. The other thing that I'm enjoying, this is another good image to come back to this idea of implied flow of energy. I'm really enjoying at one time the repetition of this feeling of the line, of the tough formations, and then the cloud. But I'm also enjoying how the movement from one subject that's rhyming to the next subject to the next subject is dynamic. And if we talk about implied flow of movement, again, this would be a contouring line. And then we could say, well, what's the implication if we're just sort of connecting dots from one subject to the other? If we look at, let's say, a high energy point on this subject, and we could definitely say these two areas would be high energy points. And then we circle one of the high energy points out here and maybe a couple in here. What we're seeing is that if we were to connect the dots, if we were to say that a viewer might move from here to here, that movement is dynamic. It's happening on diagonals. And instead of doing this, instead of having energy centers from one subject to the other, let's say that all get lined up in a vertical line. Could be in a horizontal line too, depending on the image. But in this case, we have this sort of stacking vertically of ideas. And if these powerful energy centers started to be on tangent with other high points of energy, then we could start to get an implication of a wall of high energy points that are very static. And we could imagine that that might block the flow of energy. It also might remind the viewer that, hey, really there is just the X and Y axis here. This is really all you got. And when we start to have a flow of energy that's moving more in an arc or moving on diagonals, that kind of movement can create the illusion that you actually can get inside of this photograph, that this is near, this is further away, and this is further away. So I just wanted to continue to talk about this idea of implied flow of energy. Another very practical way to think about it is to just go into your image and circle some areas that are high contrast and high energy from a color standpoint, so on and so forth, and connect the dots and just see how at the skeletal structure of the image things are playing off of each other. Is it dynamic? Is it static? So on and so forth. To answer Debbie's question, I agree with her approach here, at least to my eye. I really think that the tough formations are being helped by the harmony of the high contrast texture in the roughed up water. Be interesting to see another version of this. I mean, obviously one subject that we would lose on a longer exposure would be the gulls, and the gulls are really cool. They're real small in the video, but they're there and they're mimicking this movement of line that's repeating. That's a huge part of the design of the image, and in a bigger print they'd really come forward. But I really do like the roughed up texture of the water here with the tough, and in some respects I'd sort of think about it like this. This all has the rough texture, sort of about 2/3 of the image, and this part is the more ethereal, simpler part. And that really gets me down to the point of Perfect World Change, such a beautiful image. This is one where I definitely would look at a tighter crop on the pano. And that could just be very subjective. So I want to make the critique today about something that's really practical, and that is how you might think about cropping, and also really paying attention to the feeling that you get from negative space that you might include at the top of the image. Remember that the top part of the image, before we even add anything at all into the frame, has an enormous amount of visual weight because of gravity, and that's true everywhere on the planet. This top part, very, very visually heavy. And I'm constantly asking myself about how I cut images at the top, particularly if I'm going to start to leave quite a bit of negative space. The last positive space shape is the clouds here, and then we have all of this area where there's really sort of no detail. It's just negative space. And if I want to get practical about thinking about that, one thing that I can quickly do is say, how does this play off of the bottom part of the image from a balance standpoint? Do I need this much to feel a sense of balance? And just looking at it right now, you could say in some respects there's almost the same amount of sky at the top as there is water below this lower formation. And for my eye, that starts to be a little bit static. In some respects, you could say that there's a little bit more. And with the top of the frame already having so much visual weight, I start to feel like this area that doesn't have any of the subjects starts to take over a little bit. What I would like to do is slow down a little bit more and experience the texture and the feeling of going out to these islands, so on and so forth, even the gulls. And so if I get the crop tool out and I crop down from the top and actually come quite a ways down, very, very close to the top of those clouds, what happens to my eye is I really start to slow down on the subjects in the lower part of the image, and something else happens. I start to feel more of a sense of a dynamic balance from this lower part where you have the rough texture to the upper part that's more ethereal. Remember, this is a pano crop, so in terms of overall relationships and subject placement, it's not rule of thirds anymore. It's more like rule of fourths or rule of fifths. So having quite a bit more of this rough part and just a little bit of the feathery, ethereal part at the top is going to be more congruent with the ratio of the framing device. And the birds are going to come forward more. Let's just go back and forth and you can see what you think. So really, in a lot of respects, this critique is about something very simple. It's about looking at negative space at the top of the image and cropping from the top. It's such a beautiful image to start off with. I've been to Mono Lake several times, and it's the kind of place where I've seen lots and lots of great shots. And then when I got there, I thought, wow, this is not an easy place to shoot. And I think it's very, very difficult. I think Debbie has done a wonderful job of framing this and working with really beautiful quality of light and moment. All kinds of things are really working well here. I want to say a huge thank you to Debbie for sharing such a beautiful image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique.